Hello and welcome to Other Stages episode 22. My guest today is journalist Donald Munro. Donald has a wonderful online arts newspaper. We will talk about that and share thoughts about art journalism and change. So, how do you feel about change? Some people love change and other people fear change. As for myself, I welcome change, even crave change if I'm in charge. But I have to admit that I struggle mightily when changes that are outside of my control come into my life. Now, on Memorial Day, I took a very bad fall out in the shop while I was working on the Franken organ, and I have a substantial injury on my backside. And all this week, I have not been able to sit down to the bench and practice. And so all of the music on today's show is going to be from previous episodes. We do that once in a while, but today for sure. Let's start with a little prelude by Johann Sebastian Bach. So I want to thank each of you for supporting Other Stages. Your ongoing support is what makes the show possible. Whenever you're out giving donations, please keep Other Stages in mind, and you can always find my Venmo, PayPal, and Patreon links in the show description. Donald Munro is a longtime Fresno arts journalist. He worked for more than 25 years at the Fresno Bee, most of it covering movies and the arts. He now runs the MonroeReview.com, an online newspaper covering the arts. He is also a lecturer at the Department of Media, Communications, and Journalism at Fresno State University. So please enjoy my conversation with Donald Munro. So Donald Munro, thank you for joining me on the show today. It's really been looking forward to this. You have a unique place in the arts community. You run a website called the Monroe Review. Tell us a little bit about what the Monroe Review is and what it's all about.
Well, the Monroe Review started 3 days after I left the Fresno Bee. I'd worked there for more than 25 years covering the arts. And I thought long and hard over that weekend and thought to myself, I want to continue trying to do this. I love the arts. I love the Fresno area arts community, and I wanted to continue that coverage. So I like to tell people that the Monroe Review is essentially what I did at the Fresno Bee, with a little bit more attitude and maybe with a lot less oversight. So I cover kind of my mainstays, which are theater, classical music, visual arts, literary arts. I kind of branch off sometimes into movies and music and road trips and travel and stuff like that. But the real core of it is covering the arts.
Now, did this kind of start to have a genesis? I mean, the newspapers, unfortunately, started taking this long downward spiral a long time ago. Did you kind of see this kind of thing coming and start thinking about this maybe before things ended at the Bee? Or did it kind of come up just that weekend?
It kind of came up that weekend. I was a little taken aback. I was surprised that the Bee decided it was not going to cover the cultural scene at all.
Wow.
Anymore. I thought it was a very misguided decision. And the reason I was surprised is because people who read arts coverage are sort of among the last readers of the print edition anyway, of newspapers. They fall into an older demographic. And they're also, a lot of them are the movers and shakers in town. They're a wealthier demographic. They're a demographic that I would think that advertisers would still want to reach. And so I was surprised when the Bee decided to go a different way. Looking back, I probably should have anticipated it more, but at the time you're in that moment, and the truth of it is that my stories, my art stories, were simply not getting as many clicks online as as wire stories about a frisky squirrel who takes up residence in a school and then becomes the principal, or those kind of wacky stories that would generate a lot of hits. My take on it was those kinds of stories might get a lot of hits from people in other parts of the country, maybe if it gets linked to or goes viral, but I don't understand how that contributes long term to the newspaper's bottom line. And I've always been a really strong believer that what newspapers needed to do, making the transition to digital, is to build up a subscriber base, a local subscriber base, rather than chase after hits. I believe that the chasing after hits approach has been proven wrong. For one thing, there are the amount that the organization gets paid, the website gets paid per hit, has just gone down and down and down. And I think it was, again, just an incredibly short-sighted maneuver. There were, executives at McClatchy newspapers who no longer work there, who came in with this big, grand kind of bullying idea of this is how we're going to save the newspaper. Of course, they got a fat severance package and are off doing who knows what. But it's just another in a long list of really stupid decisions that I think the newspaper industry has made.
Tell us a little bit about, growing up, and when did you first find yourself interested in the arts, and when did you kind of pull in the idea of being an arts journalist?
I was always interested in the arts. I loved theater. I was in my high school plays. I was in high school marching band. I learned to play the piano. So I was exposed to the arts at an early age. It probably wasn't until college, and even more so graduate school, that I really thought to myself, hey, I would really like to write about the arts. I had a professor in graduate school She taught a seminar in cultural affairs reporting, and I took that, and I was just kind of hooked. I just thought, what a great job to be able to go to all these different events and write about all of these fascinating, interesting people. Mm. And so when I got my first job in journalism, which was at the Anchorage Times in Alaska, I indicated that that was my interest, and I became the entertainment editor, and had a blast. Mm. So from then on, that's really when I knew what I wanted to do.
A lot of us really kind of thought of you as like the critic, right? And I was wondering, how does that really fit into your view of the overall scheme of what you do as a journalist?
Ideally, at a large news organization, with a huge staff, the functions of critic and arts reporter would be divided. Mm-hmm. You see that, for example, at the New York Times. They have a different reporters say, write an advance or a preview of a Broadway opening. Then you have your Broadway critic come in, totally removed from the scene, and kind of render a critical judgment. And that's great. And again, that's an ideal world kind of thing. It just doesn't work in terms of economies of scale in most newsrooms. And so in most newsrooms, you have an arts reporter, and that person writes the advances and does the reviews. Right. So it does require sort of a certain bifurcation, I guess, of your personality, or I kind of put on my reporter face when I go out to interview people about a show that's going to open, and then I kind of maybe switch personas a little bit when I go to review that show. I kind of slink in and try to be anonymous, and just I don't say hi to the actors after and all that.
Right.
But it's an artificial situation, and sure. I think it's just, the reality would be that if you had an explicit rule saying that the person who, say, wrote a preview couldn't write a review, then you might just not have any reviews, or might not have any previews. Right. So that's the way it works out. I was the movie critic for 7 years, and movie criticism, I believe, is a lot different than local arts criticism. It's kind of a no-holds-barred thing, Right. It's like movies are a huge industry, big business. Movie stars, they're paid the big bucks. Mm-hmm. And if you make fun of David Schwimmer, then, hey, that's life, David Schwimmer. Mm-hmm. I think it's much different on a local level.
Sure.
Particularly when you're dealing with community theater, or theater like Stageworks Fresno, which was kind of a hybrid of some professional, some community. You take a different critical approach. I think it's actually much harder. It's much harder to review local shows than, say, even a national show that will come in, like a Broadway and Fresno offering. To me, that's a professional show. You're paying really good prices to see this show, and so I hold it up to
higher standard.
A certain standard.
Yeah.
And with local stuff, you gotta be a little gentler, but still maintain standards.
Of
and
course.
That's kind of the challenge.
Which would you prefer, to be the critic or just the reporter?
Oh, that's a good question. I really like doing previews. I really like talking to directors and talking to actors. I think that writing a good review gives me a real sense of accomplishment, I guess, or satisfaction. I will tell you that the reviews are by far the much harder pieces to write. So if you ask me when I'm in a lazy mood, I would say, I don't want to do any more reviews. But although they're harder to write and kind of take a little bit more from me, I'm really happy that I'm able to write reviews.
Do you like the satisfaction of digging into that?
Yeah, and I like to be able to say this is a really good show. You should go see it. It's not as fun to say the show has some issues. But if a show is really bad, that's actually a very easy review to write as well. The bad reviews and the good reviews, they're pretty easy. It's the middle of the road reviews, where you kind of go, but on the other hand, however, and that takes a little bit more kind of finessing.
Can you give us, how, kind of the mechanics of how you put this all together to make it work, both as a literary piece and as a financially stable operation?
I knew when I started it that I did not want there to be a paywall that kept people from reading stories. And that's because while there are lots of arts fans are pretty well-to-do financially and could definitely afford that paywall, there are people who can't. There are also a lot of younger readers that I would hope to reach. I try to cover youth community theater, that kind of thing. And so I knew that I didn't want to have a paywall, but I also knew I wanted to have some sort of membership structure so that I would at least have some money coming in to cover expenses and pay for some of my time. I mean, this is definitely not a full-time job. I teach at Fresno State, but there are expenses involved in running a website. And so I was approached by CMAC, the Community Media Access Collaborative, and they kind of made a pitch, and I made a pitch back to them in terms of them being my fiscal sponsor. And a fiscal sponsor is simply a nonprofit organization that takes another smaller organization under its wing and is responsible for really the finances of that organization. And so what I ended up with the Monroe Review is that all the donations and the sponsorships and any grants, for example, that I would get go directly to CMAC, or funneled through CMAC, and then there's a separate account for the Monroe Review. CMAC takes a percentage of that as an administrative fee, and then I pay for my expenses and some of my time, probably about 8 to 10 hours, 5 to 8 hours a week, I guess, is what I pay myself. But it's all handled through CMAC, so those donations are tax deductible because CMAC is a certified 501c3. And I just feel like it's easier to ask people for money. If you know that it's nonprofit, that somebody's overseeing it, some of it's going to CMAC, and that it solves the problem of the paywall. I don't know how many times a day this happens to you, but for me, I'll be surfing the web, cruising around, here's an interesting story in the San Francisco Chronicle, and I'll click on it. It's like, oh, nope, you got to sign up. You got to pay either a monthly membership or at least give me your email address. Most of the time, I just go right back. I skip it. We can't belong to everything.
Right.
I'm a really strong believer in supporting local journalism, and so I still have a digital subscription to the Fresno Bee,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't afford, or I don't want to have a digital subscription to the Denver Post or the Miami Herald or some other source that I might just use once a month.
Right.
So in setting up this structure, that's the most important thing was the no paywall. In terms of the sponsorships, I have sponsorship packages that involve kind of different benefits,
Mm-hmm.
which it has to do with the size of the ad and also the placement of the ad. Before the pandemic, I think I had about 12 or 13 sponsors. Of course, with the pandemic, that's changed
Right.
a lot because there weren't performances, there weren't things to publicize, and also organizations were really strapped for funds. So, for example, if you look at my site lately, I've got a big ad for Keyboard Concerts,
Right.
which just announced its new season. Keyboard, they're great. They stuck with me all the way through, and some of the organizations did. The Fresno Philharmonic eventually had a digital season, so they kept their sponsorship up so they could let people know about that. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping as the pandemic winds down that I'll be able to retain some of those sponsors.
For sure. Have you seen any upticks during the pandemic?
Oh, and I should also mention the Rogue Festival. Rogue Festival,
right? Yeah, they did do a online thing, and
which was fun.
Yeah.
Upticks. Whenever I write about the Tower Theater, I get many hits.
Yeah.
I've left most of the Tower Theater coverage, the daily coverage, to other journalists in town, simply because I don't have the time to have like the Tower Theater beat, So I've weighed in kind of as a more, with more commentary, bigger picture kind of stuff. I had some successes. I did a series called the Quarantine Chronicles, where I just compiled a bunch of interesting tidbits about people. I did a series called it was Diversions, Quarantine Diversions, and that's where I just asked people, what did you stream during the pandemic? What did you listen to? And that was a lot of fun. I got a lot of good response to that because I think people are always curious what other people are listening to and reading and doing. So I do plan to keep some of that even as the post-pandemic age unfolds.
And on that note, you have a thing you're doing about coming out of the pandemic on the Monroe Review. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I decided that I just wanted to do a big package, a piece that looks at what different arts organizations are doing to try to come back. And I did I think it was a 15-question survey with open-ended responses for a lot of them, and got 28 arts organizations to respond. And so I used some of that kind of that newsy element in this piece, and I also wove in more personal stories about Good Company Players and children's musical theater works, which were both in the process of reopening. Mm-hmm. So Good Company, which has since now opened a full show, Nonsense, it started with a musical cabaret called In the Meantime, and they had different performers come in and actually perform live, and that was the transition for them to get back into live theater. CMT, I have to hand it to CMT. CMT has been so diligent in trying to give its kids the opportunity to continue on in performing arts. And so they are doing a production of Matilda that is probably the world's longest rehearsed show. It's now in its 8th month of rehearsals. And it was all designed, Julie Lucido was the director, and it was all designed with interchangeable pods, groups of performers, and following all the social distancing rules. Things are still kind of up in the air right now. Will the performers get to sing without a mask, right? At the last I heard, the principals will get to sing solos without a mask when they're alone on stage. But the ensemble will be in masks. It's those kind of decisions and
weighing the thing,
weighing things, but also just the idea of blocking a show that has 75 cast members spread among the cast, but keeping it socially distanced has been a real challenge. So I have those two stories, the GCP, the CMT, and then I have that kind of interwoven with just the general challenges of opening up for arts organizations. And I was able to put the access to all of those completed surveys right there. You can click on it. So if you want to see, say, what New Wrinkles is doing, you can click on New Wrinkles and see what their upcoming plans are. And so that was quite an endeavor. I will say that I have learned a lot about WordPress over the last couple of years. It's been quite a learning experience for me.
Now, you have your Monroe Review. You also are, as you indicated, teaching at Fresno State. And like entrepreneurs and creative people everywhere, the work-life balance is a three-ring circus. You have your passion gig, you have your bill-paying gig, and you still have to work a personal life into that. How are you doing with that, and do you have any secrets that you'd like to share?
I wish I did. I spend too much time on this stupid computer, and that's the reality. There are always more stories to write, more things to post, more emails to respond to. You caught me on a time when I actually am just submitting my final grades for the spring semester. So, woohoo, I have some extra time. So I feel better about that. But yeah, there are times when it is a huge crunch. And I guess I'll have to watch your show to find out what other people suggest. I think what I'm going to hear them say is that you should set aside time that's just non-digital. And I do try to do that. I am a voracious reader, and so as long as I've got a good book going, that's kind of an escape for me, and I'm able to kind of get away from the world. I have my husband, I have my dog, so I'm not a hermit just like holed up in my computer room all the time. But I do go to bed kind of late. So
Now, I think you, as an arts journalist, might have a really interesting answer to this. Most of the guests on the show are performing artists, and I always ask this question, but you as an arts journalist may have a really fascinating take on this. What would be your working definition of being a successful artist?
Wow, that's a tough one. I guess it's that a successful artist is a person who has constructed a life in which they're able to do what they feel that they need to do to express that artistic passion. I don't think it has to do with how much your paintings sell for, or if you are an equity actor. I think it has to do with your satisfaction level in the art that you're able to make. Now, for some people, that means having to sell their work, having to act for a living because they want to maybe they want to act at a certain level, a professional theater, or maybe they, heck, it costs a lot of money just for the supplies to be a visual artist. So they want to at least, cover those costs. But I do think it's more about your personal achievement of your artistic vision rather than the money. Wow. I think there are a lot of artists out there there are some artists out there who kind of hit on a winning formula and they decide they don't really want to venture from that formula because the formula is lucrative and covers their costs, and then their costs get bigger and they get fancier and they end up doing the same kind of work for really the rest of their lives. At that point, I think it becomes less being a successful artist and more becoming a successful business person.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to decide, what's that going to be?
Very nice. And what's next for you in the Monroe Review? What's the next big goals you'd like to achieve, and what do you see happening moving forward?
Well, this has been an issue I've been struggling with. Right now, it's strictly a one-person operation. I have about 200 supporting paying members, maybe 225. And that just isn't enough for me to be able, say, to hire somebody, even part-time, to help me. And then the question is, how would that person help me? I mean, ideally, I would want somebody who could help me with more of the administrative stuff, the website stuff, the technical stuff. I'd also, love to be able to hire some freelancers and pay them. I don't want to hire freelancers and just say, just do it for free.
Right.
So to do that, I would have to get up to the next level, and I'm hoping to pursue some more funding opportunities, because I think that local specialized journalism needs financial support, whether it's from private foundations, media organizations themselves. We got to have some sort of support coming in to keep something like this going. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that I'm going to be posting my 1,000th post probably in June, and I've kept the Monroe Review going since 2017, and so it's like a granddaddy now compared to lots of websites. But it takes an incredible amount of diligence and work to do that. And so I would like to take it to another level in terms of financial support.
Sounds like a plan. Well, we're out of time for today, and I can't thank you enough for being on the show. This has been fascinating. I'll get to take a little different look at the art scene through the lens of an arts journalist. Thank you so much. My next piece is one of my own. It was recorded on the show here many, many weeks ago. It's called Don't Let the Waterfalls Die. For me, change is a two-edged sword. On the one hand, there are the changes that I want to make, and in those cases, I can't wait to get started. On the other hand, if something in my life is changing for reasons that are completely outside of my control, I don't like that at all. The fact is that most of the events that bring about change in our lives are things that are completely outside of our control, and nothing we do can ever stop these changes from happening. There were 3 places that were each a giant part of my formative years. I thought that all of them would last forever, but forces beyond anyone's control brought them to an end. Now, I've talked many times about pizza and pipes before, but that's for good reason. My first visit to that kitschy little restaurant was the big turning point in my life. I became an organist against my parents' wishes. I have a life devoted completely to the King of Instruments because I got to see a pipe organ outside of a church. As a teenager, I could not imagine anything that would bring that place to an end, but it did after a long decline. Now, it wasn't just pizza and pipes that made me an organist. Remember, my parents were dead set against that. But lucky for me, home organs were at the peak of their popularity back in the 1970s. So there were 6 organ stores in my hometown of Fresno, California, most within a bike ride's distance, and one in particular became my organ-playing home away from home, the Organ Piano Center. The 2 guys that ran the place took me under their wing, and they didn't just teach me about organ playing, they taught me about being an entertainer. As far as being an organist was concerned, they were more than just mentors. But one day I walked in and my 2 friends were gone. They didn't even say goodbye. And the new guy running the place informed me that the store was closing and that I could take advantage of some really sweet deals. Now, beyond the organ is my lifelong fascination with trains, especially steam-powered trains. Now, in the real world, seeing a steam train is a rare thing, and it usually involves driving around a lot of remote places. So, for the most part, I experience steam locomotion in the form of HO scale models. When I was a kid, and until a few years ago, there was one and only one place to get model railroad supplies: Tom's Trains. Opening in 1960 by Tom Worstel, in the 1980s it was taken over by Tom's son Charlie. Tom's Trains was world famous as one of the best train stores anywhere. On any given day, you could run into a customer from Japan or Egypt, and there were lots of customers from England. Customers sought Tom's Trains out and were loyal to a fault. From the 60s through the 80s, Tom's Trains thrived. But in the 1990s, business slowed way down, and it looked like the end was near. And then the place burned down. I thought that was the end for sure. But Charlie got a big settlement from his insurance company and started over in a better location. For a while, this breathed new life into Tom's Trains, and once again, business was thriving. But little by little, interest in model trains began to fade. By the time Charlie was in his late 60s, the years of smoking had caught up with him. After Charlie passed, the Worstel family closed the store for good, and as sad as that was, it really was the right decision. Model trains are a fascinating but very sedate hobby. Interest in model trains has been fading steadily for decades. The Organ Piano Center closed in the early 1980s, and like model trains, the public simply lost interest. But the decline of the home organ was really more all of a sudden. Now, I spent most every day after school at the Organ Piano Center, and I remember that the day that people just stopped coming in. It was weird. We all thought it was a temporary lull, but it turned out to be a permanent loss. For those of you who remember home organs, you know that, yeah, they were kind of cheesy. And of course, there are newer technologies that can do everything that the home organ did and then a whole lot more. But the difference is that the home organ was designed for family and group entertainment, whereas the keyboards and computer programs that replace them are really mostly intended for solitary engagement. The decline of the home organ was the first nail in the coffin for Pizza and Pipes. With the decline of home organ sales came a slow but inevitable loss of interest in the organ period. As a frequent visitor to Pizza and Pipes, I watched as the numbers dropped. I watched as the quality of the music faded, and I watched as a crew dismantled the organ and took it away. You know, it's very hard to accept the loss of the people and places of our formative years. Nostalgia is a fun indulgence, but it can become a trap that keeps us locked in the past. There is nothing we can do about the flippant nature of popular culture. Nor is there anything we can do about the ephemeral nature of fads. So take your chances while you can. Enjoy the people and the places you love right here, right now, because you only live once. Now let's enjoy the Fugue section of that Prelude and Fugue we enjoyed at the beginning of the show. And now for my big announcement. I will be performing in this year's Edinboro Fringe Festival. My show will be performed online, so for the next 3 weeks I will be focusing on everything I need to do to get ready for August. So the next 3 episodes of Other Stages are going to be specials. The format is going to be a little bit different, and you are going to get a first-class look behind the scenes as I put together my festival show.